Steve, let's discuss. We both agree that Ohio State is on the verge, on the precipice of entering a mini dark age for their program. Now, when I say that, I'm not saying Ohio State's going to go 4-8 in a season. I mean, going back to 1967, they've only had 7 seasons where they haven't won at least 66% of their games. Okay, it's a pretty good run.
Yes, it is.
In the 1990s, I think they did have a 1980s, they had a 4-win season one time. But I still don't think you're going to see that. I think you could see some 6-win seasons, some 7-win seasons, some 8-win seasons. But for them, given that they've just had one of the best decades in Big Ten history, that's a dark era.
Sure it is.
Somebody is going to benefit from that. You've always talked about when Tom Davis left the University of Iowa, and shortly thereafter Wisconsin hired Bo Ryan, and Iowa later hired Todd Licklider. You're like, it's not going to work out.
Yep.
It helped Bo that Davis was gone because, you know, just like in nature, sports abhors a vacuum. And Bo Ryan comes in and has a system where Tom Davis had a system, even though they're diametrically opposed systems, it's still a system. Some ones are going to benefit from Ohio State pulling back from their decade of dominance. Who do you think, which programs do you think stand the best chance? Obviously, we can start in the leaders, but there may be some carryover into the legends as well.
Well, the reason I believe this, John, is because I may be very free market Austrian in my economics, but when it comes to recruiting in collegiate sports, I'm very Keynesian. It is a zero-sum game, brother. There's only so many players. All right, there are only so many players. Now, Ohio State is still going to get the bulk of the best players in their own state. But if for the next 2 or 3 years, if they can take 10 less of those players than they otherwise could have.
Cumulatively?
Yes.
Okay.
No, per year. Okay? Let's say they lose 30 scholarships like USC. So they're taking 10 fewer of those players per year. You may think that's not big, but keep in mind, you better hit on the 15 you sign.
Right.
Because you don't have any margin for error. If half of these classes typically wash out for most schools or don't reach their expectation level, and you're getting 10 fewer a year, your margin for error there really shrinks in terms of developing those players. So who then is best capable of taking advantage of that? Well, the first obvious one is this team right here. I mean, obviously, because these are the 2 paragons of the Big Ten, have been almost since the formation of the conference. Going back to the very beginning, the league has basically been defined by the success or lack thereof of either Michigan or Ohio State, or them being successful at the exact same time. If you look at the Athlon's college football preview of the top 170 prospects nationally heading into the class of 2012, you know, I'm not a recruiting maven. I barely follow it, okay? There are 17 players I counted that either Michigan has a commitment out of, they are favored to sign, or they're in the top 2 of signing. And don't tell me that that's a lot. That's 10%. That's 10% if you do the math. And don't tell me that doesn't have something to do, because it's certainly not the big buzz name they got in Brady Hoke. I mean, they didn't bring in Jimmy Harbaugh. They brought in Michigan's Kirk Ferentz. They brought in the lifer, the guy that, you know, this is his dream job, the guy who doesn't just wow you with charisma. They brought in the steady hand. So don't tell me that doesn't have something to do with what's going on at Ohio State. The best running back in the state of Ohio, Briante Dunn, he's been committed to Ohio State for months. Excuse me, he visited Michigan 2 weeks ago. Why? I don't know. Been reading the papers lately?
Right.
5-star offensive lineman from Ohio is scheduled to go visit Michigan now. He's been committed to, or he's been leaning towards Ohio State. He's considered the best prospect in the state. Why? I don't know. You've been reading the papers lately? So Michigan's best positioned to take advantage of that just based on tradition and the fact they've got stability.
And
now, with Brady Hoke.
They've historically recruited the state of Ohio.
Yes.
There's no doubt. This wouldn't be a first-time thing.
Michigan can't be successful. You want to know what happened to Rich Rodriguez? Take all the other stuff. Really, we can boil it down to one simple thing. For the last few years, he has beaten Ohio State, I believe, for 2 kids in the state of Ohio. That's what's happened. Michigan cannot survive without getting at least 25 to 30% of Ohio State's recruits.
That in the defense.
And well, that's why their defense sucked. You can't beat, no offense to Iowa, great program, but Michigan can't, you can't survive on beating Iowa and West Virginia for players in Ohio. They just can't, John.
Right.
They got to beat Ohio. They got to beat Ohio State for those players.
You're talking about the tier of players that if Iowa pulls somebody out of an Ohio, it's a Trey Strauss, it's a Rick Stanzi,
yes.
guys that were first-team All-State in Division III out of 5 divisions in
yes.
Ohio, but guys really that Ohio State didn't want, although allegedly Ohio State came in and offered Trey Strauss.
Yes.
But that's who you're talking about.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And so I think Michigan's
with
very
Ray
well
Hamilton
positioned.
being an exception for Iowa last year.
And he was a big-time recruit. Yeah. Wisconsin. We sort of have touched on that, and we're going to touch on that in another video. I think Wisconsin's well-positioned, not so much from a recruiting standpoint, but from an on-the-field standpoint.
Right.
Because they're now the most stable, consistent winner in that division.
There's no question about it. I think in the last 6 years, Steve, they've averaged 9.8 victories per season.
And I believe they've put the second most players in the NFL over the last 12 years, other than Ohio State, even ahead of Michigan in the Big Ten at Wisconsin. I think who this really helps as well is Nebraska. Because the biggest problem Nebraska has moving to the Big Ten is, what is its natural recruiting base now? They used to pull some really good players out of Texas. Well, they're not going to get those players not playing in the Big 12 now. All right, California, well, you got the Pac-12 now. So Nebraska's not going to get players out of Chicago. So the biggest problem Nebraska had was sort of being in a recruiting no man's land in the Big Ten. But you got a guy, now that they're in the Big Ten, now you got a guy in Bo Pelini, who's an Ohio guy. Mm-hmm. He's going to have a lot of ties there. And his brother, they're all Cardinal Mooney people there from Ohio. I think it's Youngstown area. Ohio State, a little bit on the down cycle. They can go in there and now maybe replace that Texas pipeline with an Ohio pipeline, at least for the first few years, while they establish their identity within the Big Ten Conference. So this might be, it's Michigan's best position to take advantage because of tradition, but the team that may ultimately benefit the most from this is Nebraska, because it gives them a recruiting pipeline while they're establishing an identity in the Big Ten.
And when you talk about a potential recovery time frame for Ohio State to pull out of this dark era, there's a lot of great talent in the state of Ohio, but you talk about the construction of pipelines, as Steve just did. You don't want to let the devil get a foot in your backyard, which is what Nebraska may do. Michigan's resurgence into this area. Iowa's probably going to continue to get what they've gotten throughout the Ferentz era, and that's going to be your middle tier players.
But let's look at a school like Iowa. Instead of maybe getting one, you get 6 players and 5 are middle tier and 1 special.
Right.
Instead of 1 Ray Hamilton, again, you might get 2 or 3 now. Right. Because it's a numbers game.
And that's a big impact on a program like that.
Sure is.
I would have really liked Illinois' opportunity to step forward over the coming seasons had they not lost, is it Legit or whatever his name is?
Lugit, I think.
Corey Lugit to the NFL draft. Also, Mikael Short of the NFL draft.
They lost their best 3 players.
They lost their best 3 players. And had they not lost those 3, I was ready to pick Illinois as my number 2 team in that division.
You look at their schedule. Now let's put Martez Wilson, Mikael LaShore, and Corey Lugit on this Illinois team with the schedule they're playing,
no doubt,
and Ohio State in the position they're in right now, and Wisconsin with all the personnel issues, and you don't tell me you're not thinking.
And if they could have done that, that's, get back, they made it to a Rose Bowl, as a 9-3 team. You get back 4 years later, it makes people believe a little bit more. They had a chance. I think that window shut on them. And as long as Penn State still has the Joe Paterno problem, I'm sorry, they're just going to sit there and spin their tires.
And let's discuss that for a second. Why isn't Penn State positioned to take advantage of this? Well, I'm going to give you the number 0. That's how many off-campus recruiting visits Joe Paterno has made since they recruited Terrell Pryor in 2008. And I think the problem that they're going to have is that unless it's kids locally who grew up always wanting to play for Penn State, they're going to have a hard time getting outside of that sphere of influence for kids because of the instability there. Now, if this is Paterno's last year, and they bring in a hot-shot coach to replace him, then I think they do move up the list of schools that can take advantage of that. But I think as long as Paterno is there hanging on year by year, I don't see them positioned to take advantage of the Ohio State situation.
I agree with that. You can, as we're getting closer and closer to football, we'll be tweeting more, we do more of these things. Who knows what tricks we have up our sleeve.
More podcasts.
More podcasts coming as well. Follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/Miller and Deace, D-E-A-C-E, for those of you that are outside the state of Iowa and don't know how to spell it. Thanks for watching.